Bhakti Devi Tulsi Maharani ki jai. Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Gaura Premanandi.
Hari Hari Bol.
All glories to the assembled devotees.
Hare Krishna.
All glories to the assembled devotees.
Hare Krishna.
All glories to the assembled devotees.
Hare Krishna.
All glories to the lotus feet of Sri Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. All
Hari
glories.
Hari.
Hare Krishna. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining. Today we continue our study of Srimad Bhagavatam. We are in the third canto, the third chapter. Today's verses 18. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Ayajaya Dharma, no, sorry. Ayajaya Dharma Sutam Ashvamedhais Tribhir Vibhu Sopikshmam Anujai Rakshan Reme Krishnan Anuvrataha Ayajaya Dharma Sutam Ashvamedhais Tribhir Vibhu Sopikshmam Anujai Rakshan Reme Krishnan Anuvrataha Ayajayad Dharma Sutam Ashvamedhais Tribhir Vibhu Sopikshmam Anujai Rakshan Reme Krishnam Anuvrataha. Please chant.
Ayah. Go ahead, Prabhu.
No, Mataji, please first.
No, you go ahead, Prabhu.
Please, Mataji. Go.
Ayajaya Dharma Sutam Aswamedhai Stribir Vibhu So Apikshamam Anujai Rakshan Reme Krinam Anuvrata. Hare Krishna.
Ayajaya Dharma Sutam Ashvamedaischa Tribir Vibhu Sopish Shamam Anujai Rakshan Reme Krishnam Anuvrataha.
Ayajayad dharmasutam ashvamedhaistribhirvibhu sopismam anujairakshan reme krishnam anuvrata.
Hare Krishna. Ayajaya Dharma Sutam Asamedaish Trivir Bribhu Sopi Shamam Jairaksham Reme Krishnam Anubrataha. Hare Krishna.
Okay. Ayajayat, made to perform. Dharma Sutam, by the son of Dharma, Maharaj Yudhishthira. Ashvamedhai, by horse sacrifices. Tribihi, 3. Vibhu, the Supreme Lord. Saha, Maharaj Yudhishthira. Api, also. Kshmam, the earth. Anujai, assisted by his younger brothers. Rakshan, protecting. Reme, enjoyed. Krishnam, Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Anuvrataha, constant follower. Translation and purport by Vacharanaravinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. The Supreme Lord induced the son of Dharma to perform 3 horse sacrifices, and Maharaj Yudhishthira, constantly following Krishna, personality of Godhead, protected and enjoyed the earth, assisted by his younger brothers. Purport. Maharaj Yudhishthira was the ideal monarchical representative on the earth because he was a constant follower of the Supreme Lord, Sri Krishna. As stated in the Vedas, Ishopanishad, the Lord is the proprietor of the entire manifested cosmic creation, which presents a chance for the conditioned souls to revive their eternal relationship with the Lord and thus go back to Godhead, back home. The whole system of the material world is arranged with that program and plan. Anyone who violates the plan is punished by the law of nature, which is acting by the direction of the Supreme Lord. Maharaj Yudhishthira was installed on the throne of this earth as a representative of the Lord. The king is always expected to be the representative of the Lord. Perfect monarchy necessitates representation of the supreme will of the Lord, and Maharaj Yudhishthira was the ideal monarch on this supreme principle. Both the king and the subjects were happy in the discharge of worldly duties, and thus protection of the citizens and enjoyment of natural life with full cooperation of material nature followed in the reign of Maharaj Yudhishthira and his worthy descendants like Maharaj Parikshit. The translation again. The Supreme Lord induced the son of Dharma to perform 3 horse sacrifices, and Maharaj Yudhishthira, constantly following Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, protected and enjoyed the earth, assisted by his younger brothers. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya, Krishna Prastaya Bhutale, Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamini Namane, Namaste Sarasvate Deve Gauravani Vicharani, Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pashchati Deshatarane, Om Ajnana Timirandasya, Yananjana Shalakaya, Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha, Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Hare Krishna. So we find out, of course, we already knew this, but today we're talking about how the success of an emperor or a king or any leader is determined by how faithfully they represent the Supreme Lord, right? This is why Maharaj Yudhishthira was exemplary. He followed faithfully the instructions of the Supreme Lord. And because he did that, he was able to protect and guide all of his citizens, all of the praja, not just the people. Anyone who had taken protection from him, right? So the animals, the people, the land itself, protection is given. So we often hear people having discussions or debates or arguments about this sort of topic, how leaders should be doing God's work. And of course, we each have different ideas about what God's work is, right? If you take just a sample of people in general from different walks of life, they will have very many different unique ideas of what God's work is. Some of them have very extreme ideas of what God's work is. Most people do not base what they believe God's work is on Shastra. They base it on a personal feeling, or something that was taught to them by someone else who wasn't an authority. But anyway, we see this. This is an issue. People are talking about God's work and how our leaders should be doing that. And it's funny because it becomes divisive. It becomes political. And you get different parties claiming that they're representative. We're gonna talk more about that word representative soon. But they think that they're representative doing God's work. And the other party is claiming that no, actually their leader is doing God's real work, right? And so they're arguing like that. But we see here that Maharaj Yudhishthira, he's actually doing God's work because Krishna is there. He's there and he's personally instructing him. But also we see that he follows Dharma. He's the son of Dharma, but he follows Dharma perfectly. Sometimes too perfectly. Sometimes Krishna would have him bend the rule a little bit just to show that actually the rule isn't the important thing. The service to Krishna is the most important thing. But the rules will get you closer to being able to serve Krishna faithfully. So anyway, there's a lot of these dynamics that are going on. But we also hear people talking about, just speaking of leaders in general, whether it's the leaders of their company, the company that they work for, or the leaders of their communities or states or countries. If those leaders were better representatives, our lives would be so much better, right? So we're hearing about Maharaj Yudhishthira, he's doing God's work. And because of that, all of the citizens are quite happy. Everything is provided for them, and they're able to perform their duties, act in their material life, but in such a way that they're actually satisfied with doing it, and they're actually becoming elevated in the process. And so people make this argument that the reason that the world is so terrible, this material world, is because of the leadership. It's the leadership's fault, right? And we hear this. So this word representative, I want to talk about this word. I talk about terms that are misused frequently. They're frequently misused, and I also frequently talk about them. And when we misuse terms, as a result, we tend to stay lost from reality because we have a certain idea of what something means. And so we think that we're doing that thing, which we know is beneficial. But because we don't have a complete idea of what the terms truly mean, we're missing out on the actual substance, right? We're just messing around with shadows. So some terms that I've spoken about before were association, sadhu sangha, similar. Engaged, the word engaged has come up a few times recently. Conscious, what it actually means, not just being appreciative or aware of something, but actually having a full understanding of it to the point where that becomes the central purpose of everything that we do, the intention. Dovetailed, that's another one. That's another term. I actually meant to talk about that when we were talking about engaged the last two classes, so 2 weeks ago and a month ago. Really quickly, I'll talk about that before we get to this word representative. So dovetail, because dovetailed is a word that we use frequently, to dovetail something in devotional service, to dovetail our propensities in Krishna's service. And so generally, when people say, what does that mean? What does dovetail mean? And we just say to use our tendencies in Christian service, right? And there's something to that. But the term dovetail is quite specific. Of course, it's named after a dove's tail, which is shaped like that. But it's used in joinery, in woodwork, right? So there's different types of ways to join wood together. And some are easy, but not so sturdy. And some are very difficult and quite sturdy. Some are simple and sturdy, right? And so there's like butt joints, there's half laps, there's all sorts of different joints, but there's one specific joint that it's very simple, it's elegant, and it's super strong. And so there are also these joints, they're called finger joints, right? They just kind of fit together like this. But with finger joints, if you have this motion, they'll tend to sort of slip apart. A dovetail joint, again, shaped like that, once it's together, there's only one way for it to come out. So once it's together, there's no other motion that can take it apart. It's meant so that you have one piece very specifically shaped, and your next piece has to also be very specific. And all joinery is like this, where they have to be specifically shaped. But it's in such a way, and it's the simplest way, because there's so many. Anyway, I'm gonna nerd out on wood joinery here if I don't be careful, and I'll just talk about that for the rest of this thing, which I want to avoid. So, but the point is that the way that we can see this in our lives is that Krishna's plan is the one way, and it's the exact perfect way. And we are to shape our lives to fit very precisely into Krishna's law, right? Now, many of us at this point will say, well, God is omnipotent. He can do anything. Why doesn't he just adjust to us, right? Why should we have to adjust to his plan? He can do anything. It's difficult for us to be able to, even know what's the proper thing to do, let alone to do it. But God, he can do anything. So why not he adjust himself? This is my shape. Okay, Krishna, you adjust yourself. And actually, that's what he's done. That's what the material world is. He has shaped himself in a very odd way to suit our rebellious nature, right? But if we want to go back to our original state of bliss and cognizance and eternity, then we have to understand what his original shape is, and we have to be able to mold ourselves to fit into that framework, right? And so when we think of the term dovetail in those terms, then it doesn't just mean, like, I'm a guitarist, so I'm just going to play songs for Krishna. There's a lot of ways you could do that, and you can successfully do that. But if you're just playing guitar and you're saying it's for Krishna, it's not necessarily dovetailed. It's again, it's one of those terms where, you're on the right track, but it's not dovetailed until it's solidly and securely molded together in a very perfect way where there's no gaps for any sort of personal interpretation, right? But the term we wanted to talk about today is representative. Representative is another vastly misused term. So for most people, the term representative is used to refer to someone who is meant to represent their needs. I'm like my needs. So if you're my representative, you should be representing my agenda, right? This is the way that the term representative is used these days. So the general public want leaders to represent their current idea of what they accept as ideal, right? And they call this representation. But this is self-centric representation, right? So the leaders should represent the people. right? And this is what we demand. We want our leaders to represent us. We have our ideas of how we think the world should go, and they should represent that, right? And of course, as I mentioned before, we all have various different levels of insanity. So there's a vast spectrum to what we consider ideal. There's one extreme that thinks ideal is one way, and the other extreme, it's a completely opposite way, right? But each of them want their idea of idealism to be represented, right? So we see that that's going on. So what happens then is we just fight about not only who should represent our needs, but who should define what our actual needs, right? Because we can't even agree about that. Fortunately for us, Srila Prabhupada has pointed out in his purport, and it was also pointed out in the verse, that a leader is actually meant to represent or to follow the Supreme Lord, to give proper guidance and protections from the citizens in the way that is established by God, right? So representation doesn't go, from the bottom up. The people are represented by the leader. It should go from the top down, that the Lord is represented by the leader, right? And as pointed out in his purport, Srila Prabhupada says that the Supreme Lord's plan for this material world is to give the opportunity to us rebellious souls to revive our pure consciousness and our eternal relationship with Krishna. That's the plan for this material world. And he says if anyone violates this plan, he's punished by the laws of nature. So in other words, this material world is here for a reason. It's here for our benefit to uncover our pure consciousness, right? You go back to our original pure state, understanding who we are, who Krishna is, and what our relationship is, right? If we take this opportunity and do it properly, according to Krishna's laws, according to what's given in Shastra, then we can successfully navigate our way out of the material world, back to where we belong, as Srila Prabhupada mentions, back to home, back to Godhead. But anyone who violates this plan is punished by the laws of nature, which, by the way, the laws of nature undeviatingly represent Krishna's will, right? That's what we're looking for in a servant of Krishna, to, without any sort of deviation whatsoever, represent what Krishna's will is. So if someone wants to fight against Krishna's will, they want to enjoy separately, independently, or control or enjoy separately or independently from Krishna, then material nature, who follows Krishna's will, is going to keep them down, keep them here in this material world, struggling. So a real leader should understand God's laws properly, and be able to assist all of the praja, right? So as I mentioned before, that doesn't just mean the humans, but all of the living entities in the kingdom. Properly assist them in successfully engaging in the Lord's service as much as possible, so they can gradually purify their consciousness. This is the role of a leader, and this is the example that Maharaj Yudhishthira has given, right? So that's God-centric representation, right? So we talked about self-centric representation, where we think that our idea of an idyllic society should be represented through that self-centric representation. But then God-centric representation is, here's God's laws, and we need someone that actually understands it and can apply it so that we can also learn from it. And that's the ideal leader, right? Of course, the word representation, if we break the term down, it's represent or to present again, right? To pass information along intact without giving personal embellishments or interpretations, right? And this is also a very important character trait in a leader, that they can present what is given by the authorities without twisting it, without putting their own spin on it, without taking anything away or adding anything, right? So we can read verses and purports like this, and we can complain about how our lives are terrible because of bad leadership, right? We hear these conversations a lot, that the reason that the world is in such an awful state is because we have bad leaders and proper leaders, right? But all that does is that's an attempt for us to make ourselves feel better about our own shortcomings, right? Because we like to pass the blame on to someone else. At all costs, we want to avoid blame. We don't want to think that the reason my life is terrible is because of something I've done. But we're more than willing to put the blame on someone else, some poor fellow who got voted into an office that he wasn't qualified for and is doing a bad job. And sure, a lot of the reason why the world is in such turmoil is because improper leadership. But the reason we have improper leaders is because we currently don't deserve it. We're in the age of Kali, where people actually aren't interested in understanding what God's laws are. They're still interested, some of them are still interested in feeling as if they're doing God's work, but they're not actually interested in understanding what truly is God's work. They want to argue with the other people who are doing God's so-called work, but they don't actually want to understand what God wants. They want God to do what they want. Again, self-centric representation. Yeah, and we hear this story even amongst devotees. So before we were just talking about people in general, but how many new bhaktas have you heard, or even people that have been around a long time, who say, you know, I would be a pure devotee right now if it weren't for awful temple management. That my temple commander or president or manager was just such a bad leader that it affected my Krishna consciousness. I'd be a perfect devotee right now if they just would have done their job properly. How many times have we heard that? We've all heard that. Some of us may even have said that or something along those lines. But what we need to understand is that karma doesn't come to us by accident. You have to actually perform an action to get the reaction. So if we have bad leaders, it's actually because of something that we've done. We have to understand that. And it may just be misunderstandings. It may be that the leaders that we thought were so terrible were actually doing the right thing, but we misunderstood them, right? Or maybe they actually were bad leaders. There's so many things going on, but what we have to understand is all of these things are happening for a reason. And Krishna is trying to nudge us in the right direction so that we actually understand, right? So if we have a leader that we think is not doing a great job, then we have a couple of choices then, don't we? We can either look for a leader who actually is following properly, or we can just blame the other leader and then, go off and enjoy sense gratification because, that ruined my chances of becoming a devotee because I had a terrible manager. Anyway, we don't have to dwell on this too long. Because the reason we don't have to dwell on this too long is the point of today's verse. It's not just to point out that it's necessary for an emperor or a king to be a representative of the Supreme Lord in order for the citizens to have proper guidance and assistance. That's certainly one aspect that's there. But how many of us in this particular Zoom session are emperors? Is anyone an emperor? No emperors here? Okay, how about a king? Maybe you don't control a whole empire, but maybe you have a kingdom. Or how about a prime minister? Are there any prime ministers here? Hand up? No? No hands up yet? Presidents of countries? No? Regional manager of the chain of businesses? Anyone in charge of the key to the supply closet at their office? Okay, the point is that this verse and purport, it actually applies to all of us, not just emperors, right? It doesn't just apply to all of us so we know that there should be proper leaders. It also applies to all of us so that we know what we are meant to do, not only in looking for proper mentors, proper leadership, but also how our example is affecting others, right? This verse is showing, it should be showing us that we need to know how to act properly. It's not just that we should say, okay, well, we got to get Yudhishthir back here so we can pop him into the government, he can fix everything. No, we're meant to actually also see how we're supposed to act properly. And Srila Prabhupada explains it perfectly for us. The verse explains it perfectly for us. The reason Yudhishthira was so successful is because he followed Krishna, right? So that's what we do. We also follow Krishna. So there's a couple things there. One, we have to know what Krishna is actually saying. So Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra will reveal to us what Krishna actually wants. And then actually following through with that to the best of our abilities. And constantly cultivating that understanding, because there are subtleties of knowledge. It's not just black and white, do this or don't. It's, there are certain circumstances where something has to be done in a slightly different way. And Shastra deals with all of that. And so if we understand Shastra, then we won't be so bewildered all the time, and we won't be arguing with each other about what God's plan truly is. God's plan is God's plan. It's not, these people think this is the plan, and these people think it's one, and only one of them is right. No, they're both wrong, or they're both partially right. And we have to understand through verses like today that it's not that we should blame the leadership, it's that we also need to know how we ourselves are to act, right? Now, here, one might argue, and I already pointed it out, I'm not a king, right? I'm not even a local regional manager of anything. I'm not even in charge of the key to the supply room closet, right? I have no power whatsoever. So it's not my duty. I don't need to really learn anything. I don't need to do, it's not responsibility. Basically, I could just pass the blame on someone else, right? A lot of times we can hear that argument. But Lord Rishabhadev, he has something to say about that. In Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 5, Chapter 5, Text 18, when Lord Rishabhadev is instructing his sons, he says, and this verse should sound very familiar, it's quoted a lot, one who cannot deliver his dependents from the path of repeated birth and death should never become a spiritual master. That's fine, I'm not a spiritual master either, so still doesn't apply to me. Then, the next one, a relative. Whoa, we're all relatives, right? Every single one of us is a relative, a father, a husband, a mother, or a worshipable demigod. So we may not become worshipable demigods or husbands or fathers or spiritual masters, but we're all a relative to someone. Someone is following our example, whether we like it or not, good or bad or indifferent. Someone is observing something that we're doing, and they're copying it. And so we are not meant to take any position whatsoever. And I can't emphasize this enough. It's not that we should just sit in a corner and try to avoid people so that we don't fit in any of these categories. We do fit into this category, right? There's nothing we can do about that. So there's no excuse for us to not actually understand what God wants us to do and then follow through with it. There's no excuse whatsoever. We can't try to hide under a rock and say, but I don't have any influence over anyone, so I don't really have to act properly, right? Someone else should do that, right? No, no one has an excuse. And Rishabhadev is pointing that out, right? It is about us. It is about what our duty is as proper representatives. Again, not self-centric representation, God-centric representation. And in order to represent something, we have to have a proper understanding of it, right? And that, of course, as I mentioned, comes through Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra. We are to take this process seriously, not only for ourselves, but for those who have even the slightest, who we have even the slightest bit of influence over, right? Whether we want to or not, we're influencing someone. Quick story. There are a few children who live nearby that come by here in Mayapur. They come by to visit my guru and to serve him in different ways. And I noticed that some of them were starting to pick up some of my personality traits. We don't know that we're rubbing off on people, but we are, no matter what we're doing. There's always something there. So we always have to be sure, each and every one of us, that what we are showing is actually authorized. It's actually representing the Supreme Lord. Otherwise, we're leading people astray from the Supreme Lord, right? So it's our duty to understand what the Lord's plan is, right? And that's given in this purport. Srila Prabhupada said the plan of this material world, it's designed to revive that original consciousness, right? So we have to understand how to do that and then follow through properly and be an example for others to follow, so that if people want to, or if people are influenced by something that we're doing, it should at least be positive. We shouldn't be causing more trouble for people, right, in our actions. So this verse is actually meant for all of us. It's an instruction for all of us, right? So not just for ourselves that we should take it seriously, but anyone who we have even the slightest trace of influence over. So we see that when Yudhishthir, Emperor Yudhishthir, performed his duty properly, constantly following Krishna, as mentioned in the verse, everything ran smoothly, right? And so if we perform our duties properly, that is with the proper consciousness under the authorized guidance, then things will run as they are supposed to. And honestly, smooth, rough, it shouldn't be our concern, right? As long as we know we are doing what is right, as instructed by the Supreme Lord under the expert guidance of our spiritual masters, the material conceptions of easy and hard, or rough and smooth, or happiness and distress, those will all melt away because we will be absorbed in something beyond material duality. These things may still be there on the surface, but when we actually become engaged, when we actually dovetail our propensities, when we mold ourselves to fit with God's plan instead of trying to get God's plan to mold with what we want to do, when we successfully do that, all of these different material dualities that are going on no longer actually affect us, right? This is explained even in Bhagavad Gita, right? That's the ABCs of spirituality. So yes, this is the point of today's verse. It's not just that we should use stories from the Bhagavatam to justify why the world is in such chaos. It's because of leaders, right? Nothing like that. We have to understand that these verses are all talking about each and every one of us. And if we follow Maharaj Yudhishthir's example of following Krishna in everything we do, just like he did in everything he did, then our lives will be successful. Materially successful doesn't matter, whether it's a success or a failure, because material life is always a failure. It's temporary, right? No matter how successful one becomes in the material world, they have to leave it behind, right? There was an old quote, and it went something like this. It said, "He who dies with the most toys wins," right? And this is what most people think of the American dream, right? The pursuit of happiness. That if I can collect the most amount of things, then I win, right? There's that term also, keeping up with the Joneses. The Joneses have all of the things that we want. And so if we can just keep up with them or even surpass them, then that is happiness, right? But no, all of that's gone. So there's another version of that quote. Instead of "he who dies with the most toys wins," a little more honest, "he who dies with the most still dies," right? The death rate is 100%. We can't hold on to any of the things we acquire materially. So we shouldn't be so concerned with it. I mean, we should be concerned up to the point that it helps us engage in Krishna service. But that's it. That's it. If something is not helping us engage in Krishna service, if something is hindering our engagement in Krishna service, we either have to let it go or learn how to use it properly. If we're very attached to it, we can't let it go, no problem. Learn how to use it properly. It's all the instructions are given there in Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. Our spiritual masters are more than happy to explain it to us. They don't want us here suffering in the material world birth after birth, right? So they're just waiting for us to sincerely inquire from them, render service unto them, and actually follow the advice that they give, right? Because they have seen the truth. They can give us proper instructions if we do that. And so that's what we need to do. We need to first find out what exactly is God's plan, and then we have to follow that plan. We have to modify ourselves to fit in with God's plan instead of asking God to modify himself to fit in with our plan, because he's already done that, as I pointed out. He's already done that. That's why we're here in the material world. That's why he expanded himself as the universal form, because we insisted on having our own little, independent project. And so he said, okay, all right, yeah, I'll mold myself to suit your needs, but there won't be happiness, because if there's no intelligence, there's no knowledge, if there's no cognition, then there can't be eternity or bliss, right? It just can't happen. So we have to understand what's going on, right? And to understand that, we go to Guru Sadhu Shastra. We can understand. And then things will become clear. Then we can actually enjoy happiness. And it'll be eternal. It won't just be temporary reflections of short-lived cessations of pain that we call happiness. It'll be actually bliss, right? Okay, so let's stop here. See if there are any questions or comments or additions. Oops, I'm trying to change my.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
So, when you said that, we should really, not blame others for our, for not, for spiritual, for our spiritual growth, or what more we could be doing if it wasn't for this, it wasn't for that, right? Then what is, is there like a reference to that, like a direct reference? I can understand, like from this, there is an indirect, but is there a direct reference anywhere?
There is. I don't have it offhand. It's in Srimad Bhagavatam, and it says that when we become sincere, the spiritual master comes to us and gives us everything we need. And so if we're getting less than perfect instructions from less than perfect people, it means that we are less than perfectly sincere. That's actually what that means. I'd look up the verse, but I think it would take a little too much time for me to actually find it. I don't remember what canto it's in.
Okay.
But I can look it up and I can get it. I can send it to you. But yeah, it's there.
Okay. Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. It's always good to understand where these concepts are coming from and that they're not just being pulled out of thin air.
Yeah, because
you-
that's what, I have been always, and I say something and I'm like, okay, I know what the next question is going to be. So let me be prepared.
Yeah.
So I mean, that was like, so that's why I asked, so that if I want to, quote that, I have to be. So
Yeah.
and it really
No.
does make a sense. I mean, it's not like even in material world, it makes sense, right? It's like, it's so easy. Oh, I didn't do it because this person and that person and this and that. But at the same time, we're just, these are just excuses. We're just making excuse. We all know. I mean, even my boss always said, like, if you really want to do something, you'll find time and you get it done. And if you don't want to do it, you're gonna find hundreds of excuses why you can't do it. So
Absolutely.
yes, it applies everywhere. It applies everywhere for sure. So thank you for bringing
Yeah.
that.
Thank you. Now, I will say that we have to be careful with this, especially if we're in the position of a counselor, we're giving counsel to others. It's not always the best policy to just go straight forward when emotions are active, right? So not everyone can take that pill. It's a jagged pill, right? It's the truth that anything that's happening bad to us, those are agents of our own karma. That's the truth. But when that's happening in a devotional community or society, and that's how we're perceiving that there are people who are stifling your growth, then it has to be dealt with in a way. It can't necessarily be just said, look, it's because of you, it's your fault. You can't really say it like that. It's insensitive, right? And it won't necessarily help, right?
Absolutely.
It is the bottom line. But we have to know how to help, because the reason the person is upset, right, in this scenario is because they're expecting to make a more rapid devotional growth. And so you fan that. Okay, you want to make devotional growth. So what can we do to help you attain that goal, right? And then you just find other engagements that actually help them attain that goal, right? It's a management tactic where you have to understand what exactly is the problem and then come up with the solution that's going to solve that problem instead of putting forth another problem, right? So if they're talking about that and their devotional progress is being stifled, even though they're misunderstanding what's going on. If you're just saying, no, you're in Maya, you don't understand, that's causing worse because now they don't even want to try, right? But if you give the encouragement to say, okay, let's come up with another engagement where that's going to, actually cultivate this and, see how that works. And then eventually we all eventually see that, no, it wasn't anybody's fault but my own. But early on, it's hard to see that, right? And it's so easy to think it's someone else. So yeah, we have to be tactful. But yes, that is the ultimate reality. But we see that these things have to be arrived at in a nice way, right? So even Srila Vyasadeva himself, the Vedas are so vast, right? There are so many different sections that most devotees wouldn't even consider them Shastra because they're so loosely connected to Krishna that, the Karma Kanda section, a lot of aspiring devotees kind of talk smack on the Karma Kanda section, but it's helping people who are in the position of their only desire is to gratify their senses. It's helping those people gradually come to the point of Krishna consciousness. And it's effective, right? So we too have to understand when to explain things in such a way that's reaching the level that the person who we're talking to is on, but more importantly, not just reaching down to them, but also bringing them up to what Krishna wants, right? So it's not that we just throw away what Krishna wants and then just talk about, what they want. And it's not that we just say, this is what Krishna wants, you deal with it, right? Those are the two extremely wrong ways to deal with the situation. We have to acknowledge where they are and gradually bring them to where Krishna wants them to be, right? And this takes a bit of intelligence, and that's why we have to understand Shastra. Because if we don't, then we're going to do one of those two extreme things. We're either going to say, this is what Krishna wants, deal with it. You're in Maya, you're a fool, you're a rascal. You're just trying to blame people that it's not really their fault, right? That's the wrong way to do it. And it's also the wrong thing to say, oh, no, everything you're saying is right. Absolutely, this is such a bad manager. Let's go find you a new manager. No. Both of those are wrong because neither of those is actually addressing the problem. The problem is someone has a desire to serve Krishna, and they're not getting it. And maybe they're just making an excuse that I actually just want to go back and enjoy, but I don't want to just do that outright. I want to be able to blame someone else so I don't feel guilty about it. Right? But that's why we're here in the material world, right? So it's a common thing. So just like we, at that point in our life, because like I said, we may have been some of the ones that were saying such things about the managers, right? And not just that we've heard it, we may have said some of the things, some of us. So we have to understand that essentially it's like directions. Someone asks for directions to someplace, you have to know where they're coming from, right? Someone says, I need directions to the temple. We can't just say, oh, you get on 95. We don't know if they're anywhere near 95. Maybe they're on the West Coast. Maybe they got to get on an airplane. Maybe they're out of the country, right? We have to find out where they are first in order to give them directions, right? So in the same way, anytime we're giving advice to anyone, we have to understand where they're coming from and then help them with the tools that they have access to actually get to where they need to be. We can't give them unrealistic goals. We can't say, oh, you're over in Africa. Okay, well, first swim across the Pacific, or maybe get like an inner tube or something like that. They float, you're fine. Bring a couple snacks because it'll take a little. No, you got to give them some practical tools. You can't just say, well, it's not my fault you're not over here on this continent. Why are you even over there? That's your fault. No, you give them some practical things that they can use that will get them to the point where then they can, understand. So, and all of us have to understand this. It's not just that, like I said, it's in terms of when we're counseling people, but all of us in one sense are counselors, whether we know it or not, or whether we like it or not, because we do have influence over others, unintentional influence. So not just for our sake, for everyone's sake, we have to understand actually the philosophy of Krishna consciousness and apply it to the best of our abilities so that we can help others apply it to the best of their abilities, right? Even if it's just to encourage them to go elsewhere, not to come to you necessarily, but if someone's coming to you and you're saying, anytime I have a problem, I go to this Prabhu who's an expert in this particular field. And when they see that that's your natural thing, that anytime you're in this trouble that you go to, then they'll follow that, right? So all of the things that we do are very important, not just, like I said, not just for ourselves, but for everyone. So we are the agents of karma for all the people around us. Now they're also the agents of karma for us, for better or worse. It could be bad, they're doing things that are frustrating us, or it could be good, they're doing things that are uplifting us, right? But regardless, it's because of something that we've done, right? And so if we want to melt that all away, if we want to take away the reactions of karma, then we have to perform, as Krishna said in Bhagavad Gita, akarma, right? We have to perform our activities in such a way that it doesn't produce a reaction, right? And how do we do that? We always follow Krishna, back to today's verse. Yudhishthira is always following Krishna. Krishna said, you do these sacrifices and then you lead with the help of your younger brothers. And he did it, right? And he's always following Dharma, right? So we follow that example, that we have to first find out what it is that Krishna wants us to do and then do it properly. And then, again, not only for ourselves, but for others. Does that make sense, Devi? But I will also get that quote for you because it's important to understand that, but it's also maybe more important that when we say it, we don't necessarily, depends on the context, you know. If someone's coming to us and they're very emotional and they need some support, you can't just hit right with that. You can't just say, it's your fault, right? Just like when there's these natural disasters hitting places, you can't just say, well, it's the collective karma of that particular region. It doesn't sound right. That's why people think that's why this, what was the term? Deism, not theism, but deism. It's where they believe that God actually has nothing to do with the material world. It's not his, like he made it, but then he stays out of it, right? And that's why there's so many problems in this world. So they try to take God out of the picture, so it's not his fault, because they want to believe in God, but they don't want to believe in a God that makes people suffer. Well, good. God doesn't make people suffer. You make yourself suffer, so you can still believe in God, right? That's the good news. But it's understandable why people come up with these alternative bogus philosophies, because they don't understand the actual philosophy. And since they don't understand the actual philosophy, instead of being able to properly explain what's going on, they think, oh no, this means that God is mean, right? People are suffering. That means God must be mean, right? So, no, okay, so we have to take away some of his power. We have to take away his power in the material world. We'll call it deism. And, when we go back to heaven, everything will be nice and peaceful. But here, it's not his fault. It's just that he doesn't have the power to, they try to take away some of his power just so they can still like him. So he's not mean, right? So he's still worshipable, but he's not if he's not all powerful. So there are all these different philosophies that come about, all due to good intentions. There are current versions of our Krishna consciousness movement where they're very relaxed in the rules and regulations. They're saying, it's not so important, because the most important thing is to chant Hare Krishna. And of course, the most important thing is to chant Hare Krishna. But the rules and regulations are there for a reason. They're very important. They're quite important. It's important because we need to acknowledge that we are in the material world living our lives in a self-centric way, and we need to get out of the center and actually recognize that Krishna is the center and start revolving around him. If there are no rules and regulations, we're not going to get to that point. We can be as what's the word? Sentimental as we want, as oh yeah, but I really just feel that no. All of these things, again, they sound good in one sense, but they're just bogus philosophies that we're creating, and they're detrimental. That's why we have so many misused terms, because we want the terms to mean something else, because if they mean what they really mean, then I can't enjoy anymore, right? But we have to understand this. We have to understand it properly. I'm going over. I do that. I'm sorry. Is there anything else? I don't even know where we were.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Yes.
If you can send that reference. I'll try and send it to everybody who's on the call today.
Okay, yeah, I'll find it within the next couple days.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, this is Subhadra Gopi. I'm a first time listening to your lecture in this forum.
Hare
To
Krishna.
this question, which you are explaining, very nicely you explained, but the first canto, chapter 17, verse 22, in that purport, Srila Prabhupada has very well explained how our, like for a devotee, no one is actually directly responsible for being a benefactor, neither a mischief monger. And in that purport, he has very well explained that how we should not be blaming anyone for anything and how we should inwardly look us first. Like again, Bacho Begum comes to nectar of instruction, where he's saying that if we practice all these things, then we will start looking inward rather than looking outward. And that's how the self-discipline happens. And the purport is really, I think what you were explaining, talks. It's a very small purport, but that verse, if you can
Did you
just see
say
that.
did you say 1:17:32?
22.
Oh, 22. Okay, I'm looking at the wrong one, but it also pertained to that a little bit.
Yeah, that one, like, and I just remember, not like that purport is really touching
Yeah,
so
oh,
many
yeah.
points of what
The
you.
devotee's conclusion is that no one can become a benefactor or mischief monger without the sanction of the Lord, and therefore the devotee does not consider anyone to be directly responsible for such action. Yeah, good, very good. And then let's see, the verse is, "Oh, you who are in the form of bull." Oh, so this is Maharaj Parikshit
Parikshit, yeah,
to Kali Raj in the form of a bull. You know the truth of religion, and you are speaking according to the principle that the destination intended for the perpetrator of irreligious acts is also intended for one who identifies the perpetrator. So saying, well, I can't, if I put the blame, then now I'm to blame because now, like that.
Yeah.
You are none other than the personality of. So he understood from that, oh, this is no regular normal bull. This is Dharmaraj. When Kali Raj was beating the legs. Yes, good. So that's one example, but I'll find another one.
Yeah, there is a lot actually, but this one is a very short purport and is very, very powerful. Like, if we look at it, like, because that, as you said, like, we all are a counselor at one point of time, but this is the verse exactly,
Yeah,
like, I try to tend to tell people, like, how to take the blame, like, not just like, put the blame on somebody else.
Perfect.
Just thought of adding it. Thank you so much, Prabhuji.
Good. Thank you. Thank you for that addition. Hare Krishna. Anything else?
Thank you, Chair Chandra Prabhu, for a wonderful class, very thought-provoking as usual. Touched on a lot of topics. One thing that I've been thinking about a lot of things you've been saying have been relevant to me lately. And there's an article that your spiritual master, His Grace Ravinda Prabhu, had written. This was back in 1984. It was called "The Next Steps in the Expansion of ISKCON, Ending the Fratricidal War." And he talks about a lot of the trouble that exists, specifically within our society, Krishna conscious society, is based on the fact that we are a preaching movement. Lord Chaitanya's movement, Srila Prabhupada's, movement, the way he presented it here in the West, is a preaching movement. And by definition, a preaching movement means that you're on the status of being a Madhyamadikari, because you're trying to go out and give Krishna consciousness to others. But there's kind of a gap or something that's, we haven't necessarily risen to that, internally we haven't risen to that status of Madhyamadikari. We're actually still in our relationships and to a level of our realization, we're acting on the platform of a Kanishta Adhikari. And if you don't mind, I'll just take a second to just read a few sentences from it, because I think it really illuminates, some of the troubles we go through, whether it's with our leadership, whether it's with our God brothers and God sisters, fellow devotees, seniors, juniors, etc. It says, a society of devotees in which proper Vaishnava relations are not yet the norm is called a Kanishta Adhikari society. its distinguishing characteristic is contentiousness arising from envy. Envy is a product of false ego. Because of false ego, the members are unable to establish spiritual friendships among themselves. Instead, they vie with each other for prestige, power, and prerequisites, intensely desiring the honor and respect of others. The contentious neophyte pretends to be more advanced than they actually are. And in doing so, conceal his or her shortcomings and fall downs. So anyway, it's a several page long paper, but it's I think it taps into a portion of what you were saying about trying to understand, how does this happen? What is this from the spiritual developmental stage of understanding that our behavior oftentimes is left there on the level of a Kanishta Adhikar, which is more self-centered, self-absorbent. And when you were saying, like, how people look upon, I guess, their leaders, whether it's in society or different leaders in their life, they often look and say, they look at from their self-centered. Are they fulfilling my needs?
Mm-hmm.
And just kind of tying that together. I thought that was relevant to share.
Thank you.
In this class.
Yes, all very important things to consider and hopefully apply and to understand, because generally we don't really see ourselves as Kanishta Adhikaris, right? Somehow we figure that, oh, we must be Uttama Adhikaris, so in order to preach, we have to go down to the platform of Majja. But yeah, no, we're not. Yeah, if you actually read the definitions of how the Kanishta Adhikaris and Majjhimas and the Uttamas view others, then we actually find that, oh yeah, I'm a Kanishta Adhikari. It's clear as day. Just like when we read the qualifications or the tendencies of Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, we all understand that, no, I'm a Shudra. I'm not willing to perform any sort of tasks unless I'm getting a specific reward. I'm not gonna go to a job and maybe get paid. No, I want to get paid, and I want it to be a very specific prescribed amount, right? Shudra, done. That's what the occupation is. It doesn't mean that you're less than anyone devotionally. It just means that that's the position that you're comfortable working with, and so you can engage that in Krishna service properly. And at home, in your ashrama, you can still do Brahminical things, do deity worship like that. That doesn't mean you're a Brahmana by Varna. By Varna, if you are accepting a salary, then that's Shudra. It's as simple as that. So sometimes these things kind of hurt. We read these things and they're quite clear, and they kind of hurt because, oh man, I thought I was transcendental to all of it. And in a sense, Vaishnava means transcendental. But we are aspiring Vaishnavas, and we have to keep that in mind. And we have to be very real about where we are, and we can't let it get us down, but we have to use it to inspire us to keep moving up. And that's our process. That's it in a nutshell. And if we are fortunate enough to constantly choose the right association, and if we are fortunate enough to remain sincere even in the face of adversity, if by the great fortune of the devotees that we have surrounded ourselves with, their character traits rub off on us, the positive ones, and we start making proper decisions in Krishna consciousness instead of veering off and trying something different, then the process becomes a whole lot easier. But yeah, we have to know where we're coming from and why we're having problems. It's because we are still on that neophyte platform as far as understanding what's what, who's who, how's how, all of that. So thank you very much for pointing that out. Anything else? Okay, yeah, we've gone plenty over. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai.
Yeah.
Raj Prabhupada
Thank you. Thank you so much, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.